And then that level of vigil admits also sub-levels when you are very sort of enlightened, very clear about you have to do, very logical, very much in balance. It's a higher level of vigil. And there are other levels of vigil where you are there in the border of semi-sleep, after being tired, after working the whole day, etc., etc. So there are different qualities to the work of the consciousness, but in all cases, it has to be an activity of coordination. And then also from the consciousness is that you set in motion the signals to the centers of response, because it's very good to receive signals from the environment, but you need to do something with those signals. The signals will indicate or will require some type of response, some type of reaction to it. If you start to receive signals from your intestine saying that you are hungry, obviously you will have to do something to move in the direction in which you can find some food, because that is a requirement of your body, you see. So the system of responses, the orders given to the centers, needs to be coordinated by the consciousness as well. But these are manners, static manners of looking at it, because in reality, nothing is static. Nothing is immobile, that you open the eyes and then there is a stimuli of light, and then it gets organized in a perception by your senses and classified with a consciousness, and then stored in a certain section of your memory. It doesn't work like that. It works instantly, thousands times the same operations at a normal speed. So when we do these graphs to try to understand the works of the psyche, is a completely abstraction, is unreal. It is not like that, in other words. But in order to approach it, we need to formalize it in a way that it can be understood somehow. So that is what we were doing and discussing last Sunday, Pradipan. We didn't progress a lot because it's very difficult to progress, but we get other viewpoints and a bit of thought, or food for thought. Because we think that in the point in which we are in our process, the most important objective is to rise our level of consciousness, not only to be able to influence from our experience other people around us. So whenever we talk about something, we talk from our experience, not repeating something that we read in a book, because it doesn't have the flavor of truth. But when we say something that we have experienced like that, what we say sounds truthful to the other person, and the other person listens in a different way to you. And eventually, if you invite the other person to this or that or the other thing, they will probably accept it, because they recognize in that flavor of truth. Why did we follow Silo? Because in Silo's words, we always felt the flavor of wisdom, not just truth. In the humble way that he explained things, with an incredible clarity, and of course, it's something compelling. And all the big founders in history had similar characteristics, because there is where we started the discussion according to what you have been tracing in the Center of Studies meeting. Yes, it's like that. So we need to cultivate those attributes in ourselves in some proportion, at least as much as we can, in order to expand, in order to influence other people, in order to expand the ideas of humanists. That is our business, that's our trade, to make the world a better place. And in that context, then, all these viewpoints about the consciousness, about the centers, about the circulation of our energy, about all the things that we enjoy discussing, although we are all school members, we have studied the things at one point or another, but it's always interesting to refresh, and it's also interesting to exchange. And that is what we are doing with these Sunday meetings, I understand.
Hi, Ajit.
Hello, Nilesh. How are you?
Hi, Nilesh. Hello, Krishna. Lord Krishna is there today.
Uh-huh.
Hi,
Lord Krishna will
everybody,
be visible only to those who have a higher level of consciousness.
including myself. Okay.
See, Lord Krishna is not visible.
Oh, please do this.
Krishna.
Ajit, I will share the diagram that is created for today.
Hi, Ajit.
Hi, hi.
I give for granted that you were there and I didn't say good morning. Sorry, it's more than rude.
You're welcome.
Hi Ajit, hi Nilesh bhai, hi Krishna.
Hi, Chaitanya. How are you?
All good.
So, Ajit, this is what Antonio helped me create.
Quite impressive.
Lots of letters. Yeah. because normally we see the centers sort of in a graph without color and then with all these denominations, and then it's difficult to grasp what functions a center has. And all these squares, could you make the image a bit smaller, Sudhir, so we can see the four at the same time, even if we cannot read for a while? Yes, you see, that is more or less the centers. That sexual center is considered a specialization of the vegetative center, and is a production center of energy. Because when we study the centers, we are talking of circulation of energy. The energy is circulating continuously through all these different centers, and some of them respond more or less depending on the demands that we are having at that time, the demands of operation. They are centers of operation, centers of response to the world. For example, now that we are trying to understand these concepts, probably a larger amount of energy will go to the intellect. Our bodies are more or less static because we are sitting in comfortable positions there. We are not moving anywhere. There's no big demand of motricity, of movement. So probably there is not much energy concentrating in the motor center. In the emotional center, in the sense that there must be a certain level of attention, of permanence, and of interest defined, and so a certain mobilization of energy there. But the majority of energy needs to be at the level of the intellect, because we are trying to understand concepts, and some of them quite abstractive. So these are the mechanical parts of the centers. But I am, of course, touching my screen, but you cannot see what I am doing. No? Is what the arrow is doing. I mean, in the right-hand side of the picture, if you go like a vertical line, those are the motor parts of the center, the most mechanical parts, where the centers practically do the reflex activities. In the level of the intellectual center, if you see, there is all the work of images, but but also there is the level of revering in the motor part of the center, because all these associations of images, that they are continuously populating our head. Our screen of representation is as if we were watching films all day long, our own films, our own inventions. We go to the future, we imagine things that haven't happened. We go to the past, and then we remember halfway things, that mixing them with other things that we would like to do. we perceive things that are happening at the moment. Anyway, there is a film that is the film of our day-to-day lives circulating there. But that doesn't require any particular intentional activity. Probably the best activity that we can develop is becoming aware of that and trying to stop that activity of continuous circulation of images. At that point, if we go to the intellectual center, Sudhir, if you lower no, the other way, then you see from the work of images, then we can, the energy start to move to the center part, that is the emotional part, where the habits, the intellectual habits tend to be. The things that we constantly tend to do with my mind, with our minds. And then in the intellectual part is the more activities that have to do with real thinking, abstract logic and reasoning. And once the energy has moved through the whole center, through this intellectual part has the possibility to jump up to another theoretical higher centers, that is emotional superior center, that has basic functions that are ecstasies, arrebato, I don't know how it is translated into English, and recognition. But those are functions of a different magnitude. They are in the order of the experiences of that chapter of the Look Within that explains evidence of the meaning. Those amazing experiences that almost every one of us, we have had some time in our lives, and that really intimate about a meaning in life, because they give a glimpse of another sort of reality, of another sort of universe. Suddenly we understand things that we are not supposed to understand. Suddenly we feel an overwhelming happiness and enjoyment and sense of harmony with everything that exists. Suddenly we can anticipate about things that we haven't yet seen. And yes, I mean, if we work very permanently, almost in an obstinate way with our attention, with the different techniques that we know, etc., at one point, when we least expect it, and as a result of the accumulation of that effort, suddenly it produces a sparkle. And either we move for a few hours into that level of consciousness of oneself, or at least we have some experiences that are completely unexpected. I remember many years ago, I have been working like 2 years in the movement, and I was very dedicated at those attentional works. And at one point, I was living in the house of an auntie of mine in Santiago and finishing my law studies, and with no reason whatsoever, I knew that the bell door would ring, and I knew that was the postman, and I knew what was he delivering, a parcel for somebody in the house. And like that, and I knew that I was anticipating to something that had not happened. That means it was like a premonition of the future. And a few seconds later, or a minute later or something, the whole scene repeats, exactly like that, where it was a postman and delivers a parcel, and everything like that. And I said to myself, wow, this
Absolute
is the type
wow.
of thing. Yeah, because that, first I recognized that was not part of the normal baggage of my thoughts, that was coming from somewhere else. That was an expression of a consciousness that I was trying to have access to, but I didn't know how would it be and how would it happen. And it happened like that. Well, I took note of that phenomena and registered and continued. I don't remember if I have other of those in later times, but to give an example of what happens, that means when the energy moves from that corner left top. And then because there is pressure of energy, because the energy has circulated through the whole intellectual center, it can then connect with something higher and ignite that superior centers that are there, are installed. We have the nervous terminals, the installations, but never we have enough energy to activate them. It's fantastic because as Silo said so many times, we all have the equipment. We have the hardware and we have the programs, but the problem is with the energy, with the force. If we don't have the force, you may have a bulb at home and you may have all the electric circuit, but if you don't have the energy to light the filament of that bulb, that in the void is what start to become red and to give light, nothing happens. So it's a bit sad on the one hand, but it creates lots of optimism on the other hand, because all the installations are there. And talking then, explaining some phenomena like that is the intellect, when the motor center moves, the energy moves through the whole center. Normally, it tends to move only here in the right part of the center. And eventually, by demands of our work, you work in a factory and you have a very delicate work because you have to monitor the operation of a computer or something like that. Well, you will keep also some levels of energy in the middle part, or probably here up to the lower part of the intellectual part, but not much than that, what is required for those specific jobs. And the more you repeat them, become more mechanical, and therefore you don't need a huge amount of energy to run them. That's what happens with the habits. In the emotional center, this in the mechanical part, in the motor part, is all the passions are there. Passions and strong emotions. This is more or less what we require of our emotional center for our day-to-day life. It's full of ups and downs, of passions, of climates, of conflicts, of intense emotions, but of a very low level. In the emotional part, our emotional habits, the things that we tend to repeat as that determines our climates, our more permanent states. And in the intellectual part are the phenomena of intuition. When suddenly the emotional center knows something synthetically, because it's the characteristic of this center. And around the emotional center, all the other centers seems to be like being part of a constellation, as if the emotional center was the center of gravity. The climates, the more permanent climates that give sustain to our psyche, like the reverie nucleus, the climate of the reverie nucleus operates at the level of the emotional center. That's why our climates tend to be more or less the same. They are so repetitive. All our lives, we are more or less, we see some constants there. And of course, in the intellectual part, the center works at its best, because through the emotion, many times without words, we understand fully complex situations. And they are very good for our daily life. One of our children comes to us and we know more or less what he's going to say, what is he going to talk about, what concerns does he have. It's enough for you a glance of the other person and you get the picture of what is happening. So you have capture by emotional channel a very complex and diverse situation without having to think about it. So the emotional center, when the energy circulates properly, has an incredible function and potential in our day-to-day life, especially in relationships, to understand situations and so on and so forth. And the motor center, well, it's the same. I mean, if you move it up a bit, Sudhir, to be able to read there. Yes, most of these are acquired reflexes. In the motor part, the habits of movement, what the center normally needs to retain in order to reproduce your regular movements. For example, if you work as a driver and then you have there a whole array of movements in the right time, reflexes, etc., etc. Most of these repetitive but sometimes complex movements require a lots of activity in the emotional part of the center. And the intellectual part is care over movement. For example, if we were athletes of very high ranking, people that need to be able to develop movements of great precision and sometimes with great speed and in a very constant manner, well, all this type of training that great sport people develop requires certainly an operation of the intellectual part of the center. And well, it's very interesting because when we understand this general concept of the operation and the movement of the energy within each center, we understand why sometimes we need to train some parts or subparts of a center in order to improve our performance, our behavior in day-to-day life. Because some of us, we have deficiencies according to our biotype, according to our tendencies. We tend to work more in one center or in one part of a center, and many times very little in other centers. Some of us, we have blockages in our emotion, and we find it difficult because we haven't trained those parts. So according to our tendencies, because of the biotype, the way in which we are, the mechanical tendencies is that the energy tends to concentrate and to be spent in some centers more than other centers. The motor people are more prone to spend their energy in the level of the motricity. The vegetative people in the level of the body or activities related to the body, and the emotional people are more in the level of emotions, of relationships, etc., and the intellectual people in the level of ideas. That as a tendency doesn't mean that in all of us, all the centers work, because otherwise life would be impossible. But we have tendencies to run more in one centers than some centers than in others. And all this work of the psychophysics tends to detect some deficiencies or difficulties in some parts of the centers and to correct and improve the operation of the center. So we allow the energy to move more freely in all the parts and subparts. Again, this is a scheme, is an abstraction. That's why I indicated in the beginning that required like the intellectual center to work, to imagine that we are reducing all the functionality of our body and all our responses to these schemes, as if we were a page in a book. We are not, certainly, but these schemes help to be able to understand our movements, our tendencies, our preferences, and difficulties in some centers, because sometimes most of the problems that we face in relationships with other people, in terms of our study, in terms of concentration, in terms of permanence in our actions, etc., are related to some tendencies in the running of the centers. I don't know, Ajit, if you would like to add, or if there are other points of conversation.
I think it's quite clear, Antonio, what you're saying. There's nothing to add.
Mm-hmm. And if you are ill, for example, obviously the energy will tend to concentrate. Where will concentrate the energy?
More in the vegetative?
Exactly, over the vegetative center. Because there is a big demand of energy, because there are functions that have become interrupted or affected. And then at that point will be difficult for you to be thinking abstractly or to be imagining too many things. You tend to feel that you want to be in a corner there with very little movement of the body because you want to sort of recover the balance. And of course, there is a big demand of energy because the body is trying to repair itself. And so it's not freeing energy to any of the other centers. You will feel that to walk, to get out of bed and to do anything is almost impossible, that you are going to faint because the body is not releasing any energy for anything that is not essential for its repair. Emotionally, you are like a lamp. You practically don't feel much other than the sensations of your body. And intellectually, forget it. Nobody will make you think about anything else. They come with a question or something, a member of the family, you say, not now, I am ill. So they are very practical examples of things like that. And when you are very absorbed in your work, you also will not have time to give any emotional response to or other responses that what you have to do at that particular time. So the big center of production and distribution of energy is sex. That is like a valve, like a collector, and according to the demand of the centers will release more or less energy into all of them. That's a way in which it has been defined in our circuits of energy. And yes, when there is overcharge, the sexual center, we start to have problems in all the other centers at the same time. It's like a valve. And so we need to release energy. And then there are the mechanisms of sex that tend to discharge like a condenser and rebalance. And then everything tends to work with normal harmony. Of course, we know sex have very important functions from the viewpoint of the reproduction of life, are very strong connections with the emotional center. It's very much connected to the best feelings, to the feelings of love. And yes, it's all articulated in a complex way, but we could look at it from this energetic viewpoint, that is the distribution and the application of energy in all the different centers of response. We can understand it as a battery, as a big collector of energy. Well, like that is presented, and this sort of understanding can be quite useful in terms of correcting, improving behaviors, and be able to identify what are we doing with our energy on a day-to-day life. Because we can, through our process of self-observation, we can keep vigilance on what we are doing as if we were looking from outside, you see. That is the idea of self-observation. Our consciousness allows to, at the same time that we operate, start to observe the operations. In the beginning, it fluctuates. We do observation and we go back to our activities and all that, but gradually, this state can be consolidated as something separate. That happens when we start to have access to the level of consciousness of oneself, when the energy also circulates to that emotional higher center, because the state that corresponds to that level is the mechanism of self-observation, but not as something that fluctuates, but something permanent. And the way to test, Silo used to explain how solid that level of consciousness of oneself is to expose yourself to intense emotions. For example, to go to watch a film that is very emotional, very intense, full of action, and see whether you can keep the state without getting absorbed by the action or the film or whatever. Or if you can withstand being in a conflict where people come and attack and questions you, and I don't know, that complicated situation of social life, and you don't lose your attention in spite of the turmoil and going around you. to test your mental level, your state. Yeah, you put yourself in those types of situations to see what happens. If you lose a state, obviously there is no much consolidation. But if you maintain it, for you are tests that you need to do to check where you are standing in terms of your personal progress. Not so much personal, but internal progress. To look at them in colors like that is nice and is helpful, no?
Antonio, if you want to make a determined effort to balance the centers,
Yes.
then, like for instance, in the motor center, it would be advisable to do some modicum, some minor, not minor, but at least a little bit of exercise every day to keep the body in shape.
Definitely. It's very good for the
So what are-
vegetative center and will be very good for all the other centers. You get a better tone.
better tone, yeah.
Yes. Not only motor tone, but the tone of circulation of energy is like cleaning the pipes, you see. The energy flows better through that because of the very determined vegetative and motor base that we have in our bodies.
And for instance, in the intellectual center, where the motor part is images, working with the guiding experiences would help us free a lot of energy which is blocked in certain problems or not being able to resolve them properly. Sort of
so.
channelize that.
Exactly.
Is it true?
Yeah, absolutely.
But then what do we do? What would be the best thing to do with the emotional center?
With the emotional center, you wanted not to have blockages. For example, there are blockages of energies. There are fears that we accumulate. There are resentments that we accumulate for situations that haven't worked in the way we wanted. There are sadnesses. There are different sort of negative emotions that have accumulated. And because they are conflicts that we never resolved, they remain in the background, in the memory. And the memory always protects because they are painful situations. And because of that, the memory protects, many times inhibiting emotional behaviors that should be much freer, that should be much happier, that should allow you a much wider scope of alternatives of operation. And then we restrict ourselves in our relationships and our friends, in our habits, etc., etc. We tend to protect in a shell instead of being open to the world, because this is a point of irradiation. Is very associated with the cardiac plexus, with the heart. All the big founders, I mean, always the heart is very emphasized, and they appear with a luminous center in the chest. We do all our works with the energy, with the force, and with the practices, for example, the asking, etc., running from the heart. And we are very interested also through the work of auto-transferences and transferences to investigate points of conflict, to release and enable the emotional center by removing unresolved conflicts in the past. And when we achieve that, we notice that lots of mental contents change and our attitude towards lots of things changes as well. It's a very important center, the emotional is like it was always because of the characteristic that it have, that is a very high vibration and enormous speed of reaction, equivalent to a sun, to the action of the sun in relation to our solar system. It's around the sun, everything rolls. It's a big center of gravity of the whole psyche. And the reverie nucleus, that is essentially a system of compensation of perceived or imagined lacks in our psychophysical structure, they have a very strong emotional component. The reverie nucleus is defined as a climate of enormous permanence that goes determining the course of our life. So imagine the importance of the emotional center. But because they are all interconnected, sometimes we cannot approach it directly, but we can approach it through the other centers, through routines of work, through inspiring thoughts, through actions, as you were saying, through exercises, through changes of routine of sleeping, of eating, of everything that we tend to do, etc. And the center, of course, goes responding, because imagine that we could replace the reverie nucleus for our purpose. All we members of the school, that we need to have an intentional purpose, and that our purpose was nothing less than to be awakened. Imagine the power of this center of gravity moving all the structure of the centers in that direction. You end up waking up, there is no doubt about that. So the effort of converting all these mechanical tendencies in ourselves and normalizing, improving, and changing the operation of the centers is another way of referring to our transformational work.
So from our works, things like valid actions, letting go, and giving is better than receiving. These tend to unblock these things in the emotional center.
Certainly, absolutely, absolutely, because of the feedback that you will get. You remember that in the lecture in Madrid, Silo, even with some mudra, with some particular gesture, that where he puts the hand like that, says, we have to understand that the most important thing is to give, because even we haven't solved the problem that we want to give alleviation to others for, but still in that case, something as a result of our action reverts over ourselves. And he makes this gesture that, and so there he is talking of a transformational action that is the value of the giving over and above the receiving. But where, even though the priority is in giving, something will come back to you, although it's not your intentions for you to receive, but to give. So that is an absolutely demonstration of what you suggest, that it is exactly like that. No? So the more valid actions, the better our improvement. So we have to study his gestures when we recreate the experience of Bombay. And we'll have lots of graphic material that probably many have not seen for quite some time, to observe him very attentively while he makes his speech, and the gestures that he places and the emphasis that he puts, because it's quite significant, this type of indications.
He's like a conductor
It is,
in
yes.
an orchestra.
Yeah. but a very meaningful conductor, no? Not just in relation to the music, but because he's showing a direction. No?
Yes, yes.
Nicole was sharing in one of the meetings that when they reached
Little
for the
louder,
mission,
Sudhir, little louder, please. Can't hear you.
you can hear now.
Go ahead.
Nicole was sharing in one of the meetings that when the team reached him to prepare for the missions, for more than 2 weeks, he did nothing. He just chit-chatted, took them for a touring, for swimming, to the market, to the restaurant. And she said he was just helping us relax to reach a different level. And then he trained them in every gesture. He explained, she said, that how the gestures get connected to what you say and how it makes a difference.
Mm.
So obviously, when he does it,
They definitely came back stronger people.
yeah,
They did, yeah, yeah. And they recollect that experience as very formative, as very important for them.
yeah.
It's wonderful to have this amongst all of us, to be able to share these experiences and to review the things and to reflect, because it's that keeps the fire alive.
And also when we look at these kind of materials and we understand the internal work that we are trying to do to raise our level of consciousness, if we keep this in mind as a co-presence all the time, our activities of the movement, wherever we are active, get a very deeper meaning, get a totally different meaning. They are no more a mere social activity, you know, like an NGO. Lots of NGOs do lots of passionate activities. They do great activities, and all that is there. But here it is something else.
But not an imposed thing. It's not a formal thing. It's a real thing, because you also are working for what you give, but for yourself. Do you know that?
Yes. Yes.
And yes, apparently in the connection with the centers, there are also harmonic connections. Like, for example, when you press a note in the scale, in the musical scale, that you tend to produce an harmonic connection in another scale and in another scale. For example, that you could go from the vegetative center into the motor center and into the emotional center. So there are some phenomena that tend to bypass the center immediately adjacent and then to have an impact over some other one. For example, an example that was given by Silo was the Macumba. The Macumba is a dance that some people who were the groups of slaves were brought from Africa to work in the plantations by the Portuguese. They brought the traditional dances and the traditional rituals from the tribes of Africa. And then with tambourines, they go repeating a rhythm, and they have a shaman that tends to be the priest of the group, because they brought part of the shamanic religion is this one that works with the macumba. And this macumba, they drink something, some sort of alcohol, and then they go with the tambourines, the drums, pum, 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 and they go dancing at a sort of very frenetic rhythm and in circles. And at one point, some of them fall into trance because what they have done is, by overactivating the motor center, they produce immediately a connection of energy that goes up to the intellectual center. And it produces such an accumulation even in the intellectual center, that many times it tends to produce a coordinate to the higher center, to the emotional center. But because it's not intentional, because they have no control over that connection, it's not an energy that has been moved for a purpose. What happens is immediately after producing that contact, it starts to fall into a semi-sleep level that will get located again between the vegetative and emotional center. But it proves that it's possible to, through particular techniques or actions in some of the lower centers, to connect the upper centers. Quite interesting. That's the same thing that the drugs do. That those psychedelic drugs, really they produce from the vegetative center, by taking some substance into the body, they produce a reaction that activates later on the intellectual center and the superior center. But obviously the person has no control over that, and then after a certain period of time falls even lower than what the level where he started or she started. Yes. They are the roots of the left-hand side, the left hand, in the sense
Gosh.
of, yeah, la main gauche.
Antonio, is this phenomenon you're talking about? Is it where when he says that it was the action of the crepuscular?
Yeah.
A lower part of our brain system or whatever from the crepuscular.
Exactly.
It's not like one of the higher experiences.
Yes, because it's been promoted by intensifying or activating drugs or that type of rhythmic exercise, very intense, that produce a level of excitement and endorphins in the body, chemicals that really they are produced in a very exaggerating manner, and all that tends to produce similar phenomena that the one of the drugs, but via motricity, not vegetative, not just by introducing substances or injecting them.
True. So when we do our practices, what are the indicators that we should look for, which are like, this is a good experience for you, and this is the way to go? In the sense, like, you come out being fairly united.
Oh, obviously.
In the sense,
you recognize that experience as an experience of a different quality, of a different substance than your normal experiences. All that, if you don't recognize them, I mean, there is nothing that you can do, because to experience something and not being able to make sense of what you have experienced, and not being able to identify what you have experienced as positive or negative, well, in the end, you have to be the judge. It's your process, and you are the actor there. So it's fundamental, your own registers. But the registers, when you have worked well, tend to be very clear. And you have, again, like in highly unitive actions, the strong desire to repeat it, to go back there.
So there were terms like being more integrated, more equilibrated, more balanced. I mean, these will all be the indicators, isn't it?
They are all indicators also that have to do with the balance of your energy in your different centers. Exactly. Integration. Integration in your consciousness, integration in your emotion, integration in your movements and the proportion of them, and the harmony, integration, even in a vegetative terms. In the sense that you can destabilize yourself because of wrong habits vegetatively.
Right.
Your habits of eating or sleeping or whatever. So this is our conversation afterward. I don't know what impression you have, if this is useful or is not useful, or is refreshes things that you already know, but in the good sense, or it creates an incentive to explore by yourselves further or to apply some of these things. Well,
we'll have to ask this question to the younger lot, because they are not, they've not been able to do too much of internal work or studies. It's not being conducted on a regular basis. So, I mean, we are always game for this. We are always open for this. I'm sure. You know,
but
we can ask around. We can ask around. We can ask. So,
because when people go to the they want to do a discipline, for example, the plan of studies requires review of all these previous courses, and including the techniques of transference, etc. Because it's very difficult to move further if the basis is not a bit consolidated, where you are building your own. So it's very important to approach things, but no doubt that the first time that you go through all this, it can be a bit confusing, and it's then interesting. In the course of psychophysics is structured in a series of lessons, so it's very gradual, the approach, and you have the possibility to test the parts and subparts of the different centers. So the whole thing becomes much more approachable. And then some techniques for correction to rectify the dysfunctions that we detect in each one of the centers are available. And so you are suggested to practice with them. And and to observe the improvements. But it's a whole syllabus of studies that we need if there are new people approaching and they are interested, because if they are approaching through the message, or they are approaching some of the organisms, maybe there is no particular interest to start advancing in terms of the studies of the doctrine. But sooner or later, they will need to have a good base in order to initiate in the years to come, or in the whatever, the works with the disciplines. But the works with the disciplines is the last stage of studies in the syllabus, and of course cannot be pushed or forced into people if they haven't fulfilled the previous stages. We, the older people, spend years in doing these things several times in different contexts and in different places, or teaching to others. We were not involved in the disciplines until 2002, 2003. And so the previous 30 years were lots of auto knowledge. But for new people coming into our groups and to the whole process of Siloism, it's important to go very systematically and step by step through each one of the courses of self-liberation.
So it's a great session, Antonio. Amazing. I think quite a lot of us find a lot of value in these interactions that we are having, like a learning experience in many aspects of Siloism, which might have been missed out by a few of us. You mentioned about biotypes. I think it'll be a great exercise for all of us to go through biotypes. I think not many people know the center of gravity. Not many people know that I can be of one biotype, you can be of another biotype, and that can make a whole lot of a difference in how I approach my work or my centers.
Right.
So not many people know the harmony of centers and how to get it done. Like theoretically, it may be okay to understand, think, feel, and write in the same direction, but unless I know my biotype, it's very difficult to know where to focus my energy on in terms of which
Yeah.
center or where is the imbalance exactly. Is it in the instinctive, like if I'm vegetatively centered and I'm trying to get things done in the motor, it's extremely difficult to move. So these kind of practical things, it would be great if you can take it up in a session next time or whenever you have the time. So
Yeah.
biotypes, for us to know the biotypes,
Yeah.
all of us, I mean, in the room, to know the biotypes. And then, we used to have these graphs that we used to make on the biotypes that, if, how, what is the frequency, and, almost predictive. Later on, it became almost predictive. So I don't know if you are.
Those are the cycles, the cycles of
cycles in relation to the
repetitions and
repetitions in relation with the guys upstairs and stuff like that. So that's what I mean, that if we can do something like that, it'll be a great support to the people who have just walked in and suddenly are faced with this new aspect of syllogism, which is much deeper than they originally intended it to be.
And also we have subtypes. That is the interesting
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That's why we used to classify in the houses of the horoscope.
Yes.
For example, you can have a predominant motor type and
Yes.
with an emotional and vegetative subtypes. And so
Yes.
because we have to operate with all the centers. So you have, sometimes you think that you didn't have enough potential.
True.
If, for example, in the motor center, and after you start training it, you discover that you have incredible potential from the motor viewpoint.
True.
And things of the sort. Yeah. So
Yes, I agree.
it gives a better perspective about oneself, a better understanding.
Yeah.
Of
I mean,
tendencies.
that would be lovely if we can do that in these sessions. That would be such a great help to kind of catch up to speed.
Good. Well, let's plan it. No? Ajit will probably make note of that. Yeah.
Over to Ajit and over to Sudhirji for whatever they think is appropriate.
We propose it and we agree, and then we carry on working easily. I mean, whenever we have the time, but it's refreshing. I agree with you.
Yeah.
We propose, Ajit disposes, and Antonio explains.
We may change our balance little by little. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll leave it here, or we are going to do some practice or something.
So
We
one
can do
more
the 2-minute practice.
Let me squeeze in one more request, Antonio. Even the work on catharsis and transference, that's an amazing work. I think most of us in the room haven't done it recently. And that thing, either before we do the biotypes or after we do the biotype, that's your call. But I think that work, we need to do it together. And Zoom has got many features which can help us to do this. It'll be great for us to do that, if you find it's okay.
Yeah, operative is very important, but also it needs some conditions of quietness and sort of privacy, because you will not feel comfortable to work with everyone. You need to have with the person that you work lots of affinity, lots of sympathy, if you want, a current that allows you to relax and feel all the confidence and the appropriate environment to be able to dig into your psyche, because otherwise it's a bit forced and it doesn't work. No?
Yeah, that's true. So, where Zoom has breakout rooms, whoever we can trust can come in a breakout room with us.
Yeah.
Just one person and one person, and it can just work like a charm.
Exactly. That can be organized properly. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Sorry, you were saying something. I butt in, so over to you. Yeah. I think we were starting some practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, when this brief talk that you people are having is over, then we can do this 2-minute asking.
Super.
Which is a very.
Our talks can never be brief.
But we can talk them in briefs, but we can't be brief. That's not happening.
You will direct it? Who will direct it, Sudhir?
I'll do it whenever everybody is ready, because they were talking something. Okay, so let's sit comfortably with our phones on silent for 2 minutes with eyes closed. and one hand on the heart. Breathe deeply and imagine that you carry this air to your heart. Feel the air in your heart with your hand. Then ask with strength for yourself and your dearest loved ones. Ask with strength to move away from everything that brings you contradiction. Ask for your life to have unity. Do not spend a great deal of time on this brief prayer, this brief asking. Because if you interrupt for just an instant what is happening in your life, it will be enough. It will be enough for your feelings and your ideas to become clarified by that contact with your interior. Peace, force, and joy.
Peace, force,
Peace,
and joy to
and
you also.
joy.
Thank
Thank you. We meet next Sunday, same time, same place, same channel.
Thank
See,
you.
we did
Thank
we
you.
did
Bye-bye.
some internal work and we can see Krishna now.
Okay.